Hi, good afternoon. I'm Alison Hicks. It's an honor to be speaking at the Freedom March in Phoenix, Arizona today. I currently live in Michigan with my 16-year-old daughter, Ann. I spent 3 grueling years trapped in the Maricopa County system and was exonerated, expunged from the system in September of 2003. My original false arrest for felony 3, intent to kill my then 6.5-year-old daughter, Jess, was back on January 27th, 2001 at approximately 3 p.m. Some history about myself. I grew up in Michigan playing competitive tennis. I started teaching tennis at the age of 15 for National Junior Tennis League. I received a tennis scholarship to Central Michigan University and spent summers during college teaching kids tennis camps in Malibu and Carmel, California. I graduated in 1986 with a degree in broadcasting. Shortly after that, I moved to Los Angeles and began working for Merv Griffin on a national TV show, Dance Fear. Soon after, teaching tennis became my sole profession and passion. I became a USPTA certified tennis instructor and a member of the Wilson Advisory Staff Board. I was well respected in the tennis industry nationwide. In 1994, my daughter Jess was born. Teaching tennis was a good living as a single mom. In 1996, Jess and I moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, where my parents were snowbirds. I worked my way up the ladder at several clubs in Phoenix, Scottsdale area, and soon after became the head tennis pro at Anthem Country Club and Community Center. I bought my dream house in a safe, gated family community. I worked very hard as a single mom to afford a good life for Jess and I. No child support, no assistance from the state. I was completely self-supported. It was tough at times, but the payoff was well worth it. January 27th, 2001 changed my life tragically and dramatically forever. Jess was 6.5 and I was 36 when I fell into the Maricopa County system with an unjustified false arrest that snowballed into a horrific series of events that took everything I'd worked for my entire life over the next 3 years. That afternoon, on the 27th, things went awry with my then boyfriend John, and I stopped taking his phone calls on my cell phone. Being upset, I used my best judgment and took Jess to our cul-de-sac, to our neighbors and a good friend, Kim's house, so that I could have time alone and my daughter didn't have to see me upset. Meanwhile, my boyfriend made a concern call to 911 thinking he was calling a helpline. I drove around the corner, composed myself. When I returned home, I was met by Deputy Sheriff Anthony Rogers. He followed me into my home and asked me if I was going to commit suicide. I said no. I was having a bad day and breaking up with my boyfriend, that's all. Rogers continued to ask me and called for backup. Suddenly I found myself under arrest for a felony child abuse, felony 3, intent to kill my daughter. In his deposition, which I have here, Deputy Rogers stated under oath, I had attempted suicide. This is 100% untrue. He asked if I knew where my daughter was, and I told him she was at our neighbor's. He said she was not there. They began to search my home and open cupboards, etc. Again, in his deposition, he stated he knew where my daughter was the whole time at my neighbor's because he got a dispatch on his police radio, so he knew the entire time. My house was clean, spotless, no signs of abuse, and yet the deputy claimed I had firearms visible on a statute and said it was proof that I planned to kill my daughter. But I had no firearms in my home whatsoever. I have never owned a firearm or gun in my life. Rogers then retrieved Jess from the neighbor's house, Kim's house, and put me in cuffs in front of her and took me away in his vehicle, never once reading me my Miranda rights. In his deposition, he stated he had to pull over twice because of the snow, sleet, and hail. In fact, he pulled over to tighten my handcuffs until my wrists were bleeding and I screamed in pain. Deputy Rogers also stated that it was hailing and sleeting and 27 degrees outside and that I had left my daughter without a coat on. But the weather reports of that day show it was 50 degrees with no snow or hail or sleet in the middle of the afternoon. And my daughter did indeed have a coat on. For whatever reason, this deputy decided to completely lie about the events that day. I spent what seemed the worst day of my life in Madison Street Jail. The hearing judge released me early that morning, saying I was free to go and maybe get some simple counseling. I retrieved Jess from Kim's home, and we cuddled up to sleep with our dogs. thinking the worst was behind us. A few days later, I received a letter saying I would need to reappear in court. My public defender said this case was a bullshit case and would probably be dropped. I pled not guilty to a felony 5. It was dropped from a felony 3 to a felony 5 child abuse charge. The case was formally dropped on March 5th, 2001, and signed by prosecutor Terry Clark and Judge McVeigh. That's Terry Clark and Judge McVeigh. Child Protective Services was called by the Sheriff's Department and the very next day after the arrest to investigate. CPS closed the case immediately, stating it was clear there was no child abuse or criminal intent. I had no history of violence, no record of any kind. I went back to my normal life, thinking this was over, but about a week later, I received another letter, this time notifying me that I had been indicted by 16 jurors on a new felony 5 child abuse charge. Only in Maricopa County can you be re-prosecuted under a new case number. My public defender, Jamie Nolan, now began working against me. Young, fresh out of law school, and married to a criminal attorney, James Nolan, she was on a mission to get a notch on her belt. I was the perfect victim. A single mother, target with no money, with some money, who could pay fines. She could save the court $35,000 per day and put money back into the system if I copped a plea. So my public defender coerced me for the next several days and weeks to take a plea agreement. She started interviewing, taking depositions from my neighbors and witnesses. She said since I spoke with my neighbor, that would be another felony. This was not true. This was a scare tactic to brainwash me. She phoned me multiple times to plead guilty. I continued to say no, I was not guilty. But she was not interested in helping me prove my innocence. She only wanted me to take a plea, which unfortunately is what happens to many of us. She never came to Anthem, where I lived and taught tennis, nor interviewed any of my tennis clients. She didn't look for any of the positives in my character or life. She called my friends and potential witnesses only to dig for dirt on me, which did not exist. Meanwhile, Jess went to school like any other second grader, but she knew deep down something was wrong. The many trips downtown for various meetings and appointments started adding up. I did not know the system. I grew scared and started to believe Jamie. She said a trial could end bad. I could end up with 10 years of prison, and that Jess would have to take the stand, and that would be child abuse, and that all my neighbors would be dragged into court. Then she began working on my vulnerable side. She would act so sweet and professional and like a caring friend. She told me if I pled guilty, it would be a diversion plea. She compared it to traffic school. Guaranteed, there would be no jail. I would just have to go to 6 counseling classes once per month. Probation fees would be waived. Once again, guaranteed of no jail would be part of my diversion plea. No felony on my record. It would be off my record in 6 months. This would not be public record, or it would not be on the internet. It would basically go up on a shelf for this 6-month time frame. Also, I was allowed to go to, if I took this plea, I would be allowed to go to the Hamptons for the summer, for a summer tennis teaching job with children for the summer. I finally relented and agreed to take the diversion plea. Judge Woodburn, who presided over my case, would not accept the plea of guilty. Instead of a victory for me, Jamie Nolan's first words were, "I can get another judge to take your plea." I said no. She immediately began harassing me to see another judge. Instead of my case being dropped again, I found my case reassigned to Judge Michael McVeigh, the original judge who quashed my case back in March. The next thing you know, the judge and prosecuting attorney, Terry Clark, nailed me with 15 months of probation, 1 month of jail time in the month of December during Christmas time in Sheriff Joe's tent city, 16 parenting classes, 3 days a week drug testing, $16 pop, MMP1 test, probation fees of $65 a month, not waived, as Jamie had told me they'd be waived, 40 hours a week of a full-time job. amongst other requirements. Home visits, budget classes, you name it. Jamie did not say a word when I was sentenced. No defense whatsoever. Instead, she ran out of the courtroom and slinked away into her court office. I had permission to go and teach tennis at the Hamptons tennis camp at sport time. Jess came with me, and we had a great summer. Immediately upon our return, I was visited by 2 probation officers, Deb Jones and Trish O'Connor. They told me I was a convicted felon, 5 child abuser, and I could never teach kids tennis again. I could never vote either. I would have to report to all employers that I was a felon child abuser. That's when my world started to fall apart. It made no sense to me. Why would they let me go to the Hamptons, teach tennis to children, and now tell me I couldn't? I began to panic. I said, how am I going to make my house payment? They told me to sell it. What about my car payment? Buy a junker, they said. But I have a lease. It's a safe car. They told me to get 3 part-time jobs if I had to. But I was not going to be able to teach kids tennis and tell all employers I was a child abuser. Who will watch Jess while I'm at all these 3 part-time jobs? They told me to get a babysitter. They said, you pled guilty, now you have to do the time. Somebody here said, you do the crime, you do the time. Well, that wasn't part of my plea deal. I told them that was not part of my plea agreement. It was a diversion plea, but they did not listen. This was when I realized Maricopa County system were the true child abusers. I fought and fought one by one, the losses took place. I filed for a reversal of the plea. I applied for state assistance, food stamps, cash aid, medical insurance, you name it, which taxpayers amongst yourself are still paying for today. I worked with adults on the tennis courts and followed all probation directives. Expenses became impossible, especially being a single mom. I lost my house. I tried to get an apartment, but I couldn't because of the felony record on my background check that was supposedly supposed to be up on a shelf. Judge McVeigh's assistant did write a letter to my apartment complex saying that I was not really a felon. It was just a diversion at the moment. I got the apartment, but it was a little confusing. Am I a felon or not? I had to pull Jess out of her school at Anthem, which was tragic for a 2nd grader in the middle of the school year. She had to leave all her friends. She grew sadder and sadder, now with no friends in a new place.